Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3H's of the channel. And in this video, it's all about weird and crazy things to happen in cities and towns. So if this sounds like something that you may be interested in, pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. My friends and I saw an invisible man twice when we were kids. We would spend most of our time after school in the creek behind our houses. We lived in the same neighborhood, just outside of a large town. We would catch tadpoles, crawdads, snakes, all that kind of stuff. This was before the water got polluted and shined like oil by a construction company upstream, so we had a lot to catch. Anyways, my brother and I were using chalk to write the newest bad words that we discovered on the entrance of a storm drain that would drain water from one part of the neighborhood straight to the creek if it started to flood. We heard footsteps coming from the other side of the drain and looked to see if it was one of our friends who always came from there since his house was next to the entrance, but nothing was there, and we could easily see across from the other side. But the steps kept coming. We watched as the steps left the drain and went straight into the creek, leaving pockets of air like legs in the water as they crossed to the other side. We told our friends later that day that we saw a ghost while scooping a net through the water for tadpoles. They didn't believe us, so we went back to the storm drain to show them where it was and where everything happened. We looked around for a bit until one of my friends shouted and pointed upstream. We all looked where he was pointing, and there was the shape of a man, shimmering like nothing we'd ever seen before. It walked off, and we ran screaming about this ghost and never saw it again. There's definitely some kind of invisible entity out there. It could be interdimensional, could be aliens, or it could be spirits. It's all beyond me, though. I had something weird happen to me a little over 10 years ago, and it still sticks with me. I'll make it short and sweet. I was walking home from the club one night. It was around 2:30 a.m. I was about 5 minutes away from my street when I noticed that there was this little girl in her early teens walking about 20 or 30 meters behind me. This didn't really set off any alarms, since kids are roaming the streets all hours of the night where I live. She continued to follow me all the way home until I walked into my street, where she stopped at the start of the street and just stared at me. This is when I got a little uneasy. I looked at her, and her eyes were huge and completely black. I don't know if it was just me being drunk or what, but it seemed like time stopped and everything around me disappeared, and it was just her staring into my soul. After what seemed like forever, I turned around and pasted into my house. No more investigation went on after I got into my house. Screw that. I'm not getting got by a kid with black eyes. I saw my first ghost about a year ago. It was in August of 2023. I work as a janitor in the hospital. Once a month, I go over to what used to be the hospice building to clean it. It's just used for storage now. So I'm doing my thing. I'm cleaning the entryway, the doors, the windows, and all that kind of stuff. In the reflection of the glass, I notice somebody standing behind me, way down at the other end of the corridor. I turn around. Initially, I was thinking that one of the nurses may have come looking for me for some odd reason. But at the end of the hallway, about 100 yards facing away from me, is a short, fragile-looking woman in her mid-20s. Couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall. She is dressed like it's the late 1800s, very regal, very fancy. It looked almost Victorian era, with like a corset, a bustle, a feather hat, the whole 9 yards. She turns around and just stares at me. She points at a room next to her for about 20 seconds, then walks into it. At this point, I'm not thinking ghost. I'm thinking some CNA or nurse has got to be pulling some elaborate TikTok prank or something. I walk down to the room that she went into, and the door is open, but the room is totally empty. The only way in or out of this room is that door, which I've been walking towards and looking at the entire time. I check the closet, the bathroom, even the cupboards under the sink. There's nobody there. It's an empty, windowless, unused hospital room. I realize that I probably just saw a ghost. It wasn't like, oh, I saw something move at the corner of my eye. It was incredibly real. I stared at this woman in Victorian-era clothing for a solid 30 seconds as she pointed at that room before walking into it. I'm still kind of beside myself on it. I'm not even freaked out, so much as I'm like, what the hell was that? This all happened years and years ago, but it still really sticks with me. For starters, I was living in Montreal. I was living on the West Island in Pierrefonds with my girlfriend. The 2 years prior to this, I had been attending college and working at some really crappy cafe. Eventually, dealing with the awful customers finally got to me, so I quit my job at the cafe and started looking for a different job, preferably one where I wouldn't have to deal with dickheads constantly. It got to the point where nobody was hiring, and I desperately needed money for rent, school, and doing stuff socially. I was talking to my best friend about me having a hard time financially, and he told me that if I helped him do this thing, he'd split the profit with me. Well, I'm not sure what it was, but my friend's father had something to do with property, mostly commercial, stores, factories, and stuff like that. No homes or anything. What my friend would do is look through his dad's work stuff, find out the addresses of these closed down places, what their purpose was, how long ago they closed down, etc. He had some sort of personal evaluation process where he'd consider whether or not a place was worth looting, and if it was a good time to do so. I went with him to a couple of places to salvage what we could sell to anyone willing to buy it. There were some pretty valuable finds. It's pretty shocking what people will just leave behind. Anyways, things were going well. I was making a very decent amount of money doing the occasional job with him. One day, he finds out about this place between Montreal and Toronto. So he drives us over there, and this place looks really scummy. He said that it had only been abandoned a year prior, but the paint was peeling. There was trash everywhere, and the whole place smelled like piss. We had arrived at around 6 p.m. or so, not too early, not too late. To this day, I'm not really sure what the purpose of this place was. I figure it might have been some sort of refinery or waste management center or something, because the main reason we were there was to strip the piping. Lots of copper in places like that, and if you get enough, it can lead to a very decent sum of cash. Well, we take shifts waiting outside near my friend's 4x4 pickup, and then going inside to strip anything that looks valuable. We'd been there for about 2 hours, and we were almost done looking through the place. It was my turn to wait on lookout, while my friend cleared out the last of this shithole. It's been about 2 hours by this point, and it was getting dark. My friend sends me a text saying something along the lines of, "This shit's weird. Park the truck behind the bushes and get over here. Bring something, just in case." I assumed that he meant bring something in a weapon capacity, so I brought along 2 of the cleaner, smaller pipes, and I headed to the back of the building. My friend gestures for me to come over and looks visibly freaked out, which is rare because he's normally quite level-headed. The last room had 3 tents set up in it, and it just smelled like total ass. And there were stains everywhere. From the looks of it, it looks like it could have been feces or vomit, but a lot of them looked like aged bloodstains. There were what looked like family photos everywhere, but of different families, not just different photos of the same one. Needless to say, we were pretty on edge at that point, but nobody was there, and we were armed, so we thought that we would just look through the tents and then get out. 2 of the tents were repulsive on the inside, but nothing was too bad. The one on the far left, on the other hand, was full of dead animals. The majority of them were cats, mostly strays, but a few of them had collars. There were over 10 in there, minimum. At that point, it became too much, and we just want to leave. But Dennis saw one more spot that he wanted to check out. There was this office that was near the entrance that was boarded up, and there was a bunch of office stuff in there that looked mostly still intact. Supplies, a small filing cabinet, a computer monitor. Wishful thinking because it didn't work anyways. I was really anxious to leave because I was pretty spooked, so I told my friend to go and start up the car. I'd search the office and bring the stuff around the back. Seeing as how I couldn't use the door, I figured I'd just break the window. The place was already busted anyways, so I didn't feel bad about it. I head into the office, and I shit you guys not, there was a dead guy, a body, slumped in the corner of the room. I couldn't see him because he was right behind the door that was blocked up. I'm not big into forensics or any of that, but it looked like he'd been killed at least a few months. What really freaked me out was that the door was boarded up shut from the outside. I'm the one that just broke the window then, and there was just a dead guy in there. This must have meant that someone had killed him in there, left him, and nailed the door shut with a bunch of scrap wood. Or maybe he killed himself and somebody boarded it shut, I don't know. The point is, he didn't exactly lock himself in there. I couldn't take it anymore. I sprinted to the car. I threw up in the bushes. I didn't want to be anywhere near that body. I don't know if they can get my DNA from that, but I tried to be careful. The worst part is, neither of us even called it in, because our fingerprints were all over that place. I know it sounds like horseshit, but it actually happened, and I completely stopped doing anything of that nature after that. I just want to forget that that ever happened. The summer after graduating high school in the Metro Detroit area of Michigan, almost every weekend was grad party after grad party. Towards the end of the summer, one of my closest friends had his at his house. Now his house backs up to a small wooded area, probably no more than 50 to 100 yards deep, and maybe 20 to 30 yards across. It's small enough to where you can see the house on the other side of it during the day, and some of the lights on in the house at night. Additionally, the houses surrounding this belong primarily to the elderly, so no one is out past 10 o'clock or so anyways. And finally, we never drank or tried any sort of intoxicating substance until months after this all occurred. This all comes into play as the night begins to unfold. Once it started to get dark out, the party died off. At this point, it was only me, him, 3 of our friends. Around 10 p.m., we thought that it would be a good night for a bonfire, so we got some wood together, along with the lighter fluid and lighter, and we got a nice little fire going. We spent a good hour or so just having a good time, sharing stories, and laughing until one of our friends had to leave. This left about 4 of us until about half an hour later, when one of them had to leave as well. So her boyfriend took her home, and he told us that he'd be back in a little bit. Suddenly, it was the 2 of us, and this is when things got interesting. As my friend sat facing back toward the woods, and I, with my back to the woods, we started hearing some noises, sticks cracking on the ground, leaves being brushed through, those sort of things. He laughed it off, saying that it was just the neighbor's cat. As we sat and continued to shoot the shit, the noises continued, and I continued to brush them off under the assumption that it was just a cat. However, I was a little unnerved when we both heard what sounded like footsteps in the front yard. At first, we thought that our friend had gotten back early, but realized that it wasn't him after a few minutes had gone by. Eventually, our friend came back from dropping off his girlfriend at home, and we started talking again like nothing had happened. A couple minutes later, however, the noises from the woods started up again, but this time they were closer, much closer. I could see that my friend was clearly unnerved by this, and I reminded him that he told me that it was just a cat. He looked at me and told me that they didn't have a cat. He said that just to reassure himself earlier that it was nothing. I quickly got up and moved to the other side of the fire and sat down between my two friends, so we were all facing the woods. After using a few choice words toward my friend to express about how I felt about him letting me sit with my back towards whatever was back there, things again took a bit of a turn. We saw something move in the brush. It was slight, but noticeable. It looked fairly big too, about 5 feet tall, kind of human-like. We tried to joke it off and convince ourselves that it was nothing. This worked until a few moments later when we started to see more movement. This continued for a couple of minutes until it got significantly closer, and we decided to go inside. We hurried as we started to grab everything that we needed to take in and put the lid on the fire. Really, it was just an old dome-shaped metal barbecue grill without the legs. Throughout this time, it continued to move closer to us. It almost seemed hesitant, yet curious, as we saw it dart about. Nonetheless, we rushed inside. We locked the door behind us, and we went to the windows. By this point, it knew that we were inside, and it was coming up to the house. It would dart by the windows as we ran between the windows in the house, in the hopes that we could catch a glimpse of what had us so scared. We made out some basic details. It was about 5 feet tall when it was hunched over, humanoid and pale, almost white, but still a little gray kind of pale. This lasted for a good 10 minutes until we heard the scratching of nails on the wooden deck connected to the house. Around this time, it seemed to shift its focus toward the fire, as we apparently didn't put the lid back on completely. Before I knew it, my friend was calling us over to the window that faced the fire. The lid was off, and we could see the shape of it darting around the fire. We later found the lid about 10 feet away from the pit. Something had to have picked it up by the hot metal handle and thrown it over there. Around this time, we noticed that it was around some of the other windows. It was then that we realized that there wasn't just one of whatever it was. There were multiple. If I had to guess, I'd say there were about 4 or 5. This general activity continued for about 20 minutes until I decided that I was going home. Our other friend decided that he would do the same, so neither of us would have to walk to our cars alone. We both parked maybe 20 or 30 yards from the house, but since the activity had only increased since it started, 20 yards seemed like a mile because of our nerves. After our friend tried and failed to convince us to stay the night there with him, we left. Out the front door and to our cars within about 30 seconds. As we went to get in our cars, however, we faced the backyard and both saw multiple of the things crouched down about halfway to the ground. Some were in open parts of the yard looking at us, and some behind trees, looking back at the house. As we both drove away, I looked back and saw the shape of a head looking into one of the windows of the house. As we left his neighborhood, which is kind of hidden in a wooded area, we both saw something cross the street behind our cars. As soon as we both got back to our houses, we got onto our group chat to confirm what we saw after leaving the house. Any doubt that I had about what I saw was quickly thrown out the window as soon as my friend described what he saw, without any input as to what I saw. As the three of us recounted the night in our group chat, my friend continued to update us on the events still unfolding at his house. Besides seeing the figures outside his windowsill, he claimed that he saw a face in the window at one point, pale skin and black eyes. He described them as almost being like holes in the face. They were so dark. He also claimed at one point something had scratched the screen on his window. And I guess we're not the most sensible people, because the next night, we were right there, right back at it. We knew what we saw, and we needed validation. This time, we had another person stay with us, so they could back up our claims. We needed evidence that was better than just our word. It was too dark to take pictures or any kind of video. We set up the night, just like the previous. Everyone got to the house. We got a nice fire going, and we waited for things to start up. Once it got dark out, we started hearing the rustling in the brush again. An hour or so later, the noises got closer, and I switched sides so that all four of us were facing the wooded area. Within minutes, we saw whatever was out there moving through the brush again. They were probably about 2 or 3 at this point. They were surrounding us. We got up and calmly tried to put the lid on the fire. We figured that if we showed it that we were afraid, they might go for us. As soon as we finished getting the lid on the fire and grabbed everything we needed, we rushed inside. Before we knew it, they were darting past the windows again. At this point, the fourth person, who hadn't been with us during it all the night before, agreed that something was out there. As time passed, we gathered up the courage to go back out and stand on the deck and try to get some kind of evidence. We stood out there as they got closer. There were more this time, maybe 5 or 6. We stood there in silence as we observed them. They almost seemed curious, with a hint of mischief. Some watched us, some ran around. One even scratched the underside of the deck directly beneath my feet. I could feel it as its nail dragged across the wood. At one point, a deer ran out of the wooded area just a bit further down the road. It was like it was running away from something, but definitely not us, because it ran somewhat toward us, not away from us. Throughout this time, I had been recording audio on my phone. At first, it didn't seem like I captured anything. Going through the recordings the next day, however, I noticed something short but apparent. I isolated the snippet of audio and used an online tool to amplify the volume several times so that it could be heard more clearly, and that's when it struck me. It was almost like a growl. After all of this, we hurried back into the house. The 3 of us left, and again, we saw whatever they were in the yard as we bolted to our cars. A lot of time has passed since those nights, and the thought of it all still terrifies me to this day. What's more, as I was out driving the other night, I decided to pass through his neighborhood to sort of reminisce about old times. As I was driving through, I saw those same pale figures, hunched over and moving about. There were about 4 or 5 of them, and I'm looking for answers. Any idea as to what we might have seen those nights? Let me know. The events still haunt my memories to this day. So those were pretty crazy, weren't they? If there was one in specific that you liked, be sure to let me know which one down in the comments. And if you have one of your own, as always, you can send it in to me at the email in the description. Down there as well as a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And with that, I don't think I'll keep you any longer. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.